If you have been in this situation, I'm not talking about you specifically. This is a situation I have seen lots and lots of times of. Lovely Christian person decides to open safe space for usually LGBT people to come and worship and find community. LGBT people of the local area go, yay, we have safe space, we can come and worship. And for a few months, you have lovely space of LGBT people enjoying worship, maybe with some allies and some others. And then something goes wrong, because you know what people are like. And sooner or later, one of the people is going to do a people thing and annoy somebody. And because you're dealing with a situation of a lot of traumatized people, sometimes somebody will do something, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. The other person, it will hit their trauma trigger, and their brain will go into overdrive. They will feel like the world is ending, because in their brain it literally is. And they will have an absolute meltdown. That person might go and tell the safeguarding person, this has happened, it's awful, I'm feeling this immense amount of pain. Safeguarding person might do a quick, just let me check what happened here, and say, look, this person did this thing, but it's not enough to call the police, you know what I mean? It was the thing that was genuinely hurtful. But because we're dealing with trauma reactions, people can sometimes react to each other in ways that are really explosive, and sometimes people's sense of justice in that can cause us to make things into a really big deal, and sometimes it just destroys those spaces, and you end up with people having nowhere they can go to worship. And I think it's good to have a think about, as people who are trying to be inclusive, and this is not just an LGBT thing, but how can we work together in these spaces? I would like to, is my PowerPoint available, please? Nice PowerPoint person, thank you. I have a little video that I would like to play you. That is nothing to do with LGBT at all, but it is an interview that Jon Stewart did on The Daily Show with a Palestinian and an Israeli activist talking about their experiences that I would just like to play you a very, very short clip.
Moments where two histories collide with narratives that don't in any way align.
I'll give you an example from my dad.
Please.
My father came to his first peace agreement. He was a peace meeting. He was very opposed to me going and meeting Israelis in the beginning. Mainly, he was afraid they're going to put me in prison, and the same thing that happened to my brother and to his cousin would happen to me. And he came, and after he heard a few minutes, he raised his hand and he goes, I have a question. This Holocaust thing you guys talk about it. I'm like, I was the chairman of that organization. I'm going like, oh no, I'm getting fired. And he goes, did it really happen?
Oh.
And I'm already thinking I'm fired already.
Yeah. I love the fact that no matter who you are, dads are dads. But your parents are your parents. No matter what, it's like, oh my God, don't do the accent. What are you doing?
But he asked that, or did the Israeli government uses it for what it's doing to us? And he goes on, and you can hear a pin drop in the room. Nobody knew how to deal with it. And then our good friend Rami Al-Hanan, whose father was in Auschwitz, he stood up and he said, I don't want you to believe in something you never learned about. If you're willing, I'll have my dad, who was in Auschwitz, take you to the Holocaust Memorial and walk you through it and listen to the story. Listen to what he went through. And that's what we did. 70 other Palestinians went with my dad to the Holocaust Memorial with the Parent Circle who organized this. And it was incredible. It wasn't easy. There were moments that were very tense. A whole day, people cried, people were hurt at times, people were upset at times. 2 weeks later, the Israelis, a week or two later, in the same organization came and said, you did this, we want to do the same. Can we come to a Palestinian village that was destroyed in 1948? We want to hear your story. And again, it was not easy. Right. It was really difficult. But unless we ask the difficult questions, unless we're willing to not just walk on eggshells, which many people do, even the peace movement sometimes, we can't walk on eggshells. We need to be honest and say, here's where we disagree, let's go and visit, let's talk, let's understand, and let's debate. It's fine, let's debate it.
So how is this, when you are outside of, I know my reaction to you guys, all I want to do is hug you.
Thank you. So I wanted to use that example as one that I think probably isn't immediately relevant to many of us in this room, unless you have Palestinian or Israeli heritage, of just being able to see a situation where people are coming from incredibly opposing viewpoints, incredibly painful personal experience. But in that example, they were able to make movement towards each other by being able to listen to each other's stories. And I think it's an incredibly important thing that we need to get our heads around as we're working in this area of reconciliation, basically. This is what it is, isn't it? It's reconciliation of people who are not like each other, reconciliation of people who have opposing views, who have been maybe polarized into opposing tribes through social media, through different messaging they've received, and how we get towards this place of reconciliation, of being able to hear each other, of being able to work together, where that is safe. And I'm going to add that, particularly if you are a member of a minoritized community, then there will be times where that's not safe for you, and that is also okay. It's sometimes hard because we have competing needs. What one person needs may appear to be the opposite of what another person needs. What color do you have your type and your background on the slides of your PowerPoint? Look, one person may say, I need it this color for my dyslexia, and another person may be, I need it this color for my visual impairment, and you can't do both. Our unprocessed trauma, and that I'm not going to say that doesn't apply to leaders. We can all have unprocessed trauma, am I right? We can have unrealistic expectations of the space, and that we think this is going to be the place, everything is going to be okay. Spoiler, it won't. We can get a bit, this is the Inclusive Churches one. If you're the church who signed up to the Inclusive Church Charter and you've got your little badge on your website, you can be like, well, we're an inclusive church. We don't need to worry about any of that. And sometimes it can make us question ourselves a little bit less than maybe we need to if somebody comes and says, actually, this thing you did really excluded me. We can have assumptions about what we think people need. Oh, I did this. A while ago, I was organising an event, and I really... Having good diverse representation in events is really, really important to me. And I'd invited a black leader to lead worship at this event, and it was brilliant. They did an amazing job, but I made a massive error because we were working in a majority white church at that point, and I've been a musician for a long time, and in that time I've had this passion for kind of racial justice, and also I worked in a 95% black African school at one point, so I've been really immersed in African gospel music for a number of years, and I'd had gospel piano lessons back in the day, just because I wanted to learn some more interesting chords, but again, that had really immersed me in it. And I got to this point and thought, oh yeah, I can just drop this worship leader in with this band and it will be fine. It totally wasn't. And not to big myself up, but I forgot I'd done the work. And I forgot that these, lovely people who turned up to do this band hadn't done the work and maybe didn't understand totally how it worked. And there was complete miscommunication because I had made assumptions about what people needed. I hadn't said, this person's going to come in and lead in this way. You might need to do a bit of extra work for that. How can I help you? How can I support you to do that? And thank goodness they were all utter professionals and utterly full of grace, and they made it amazing. But it needn't have been like that because I made assumptions about what people needed to be able to communicate well. And I've learned sometimes we can see needs as obstacles, we can see it as a problem, we can see it as a thing that we can't be bothered to solve, or it's going to spoil our style, or it's going to make things look less shiny. There are lots of reasons why inclusion can sometimes be tricky. If I could have the next slide, thanks. So, sorry, this is supposed to come up one bullet at a time, but we'll just work with it. So I'm just going to say a couple of things that I think, partly from my research into churches and partly from experience, I've found helpful. And then, to be honest, I'd like to open it up to the floor pretty quickly and maybe share some experiences that people have had. If we can add anything to those lists, any other things that we think will help us with this dialogue, because I think it is one of those things where we're all going to keep learning all the time. I have learned, leaders, don't say this is a safe space, because as long as there are people in it, it won't be. Because we're all slightly annoying, we're all slightly awkward, we all have these slightly competing needs, and we all think we're normal. And as soon as you have more than one group of people or more than one person in a space, married couples know what I'm talking about, you have this set of different assumptions, different expectations, and sooner or later it's not going to match. I've learned not to say all are welcome, because I'm a safeguarding officer. And I know that there's times when, when you've just been released from prison on offences against children, then you're not going to be allowed into our building with free-range children unless we have a proper protection plan in place and you agree to that. If you've just been beating up your family, then actually you're not welcome to come into the space where they're trying to worship and trying to rebuild their lives. I'll find you another space. I'll meet with you separately. I'll try and facilitate that. But we can't always say all are welcome. And I think we have to not be naive about that. The most important thing, I think, is making space for stories and listen. I'm doing research into charismatic worship culture for my PhD, and the one thing that makes the difference between churches that have a healthier culture and churches that have a less healthy culture is whether they can hear stories, whether they make space for people to tell stories, whether they listen to them when they do, especially marginalized people, especially stories that aren't all pretty and shiny, that don't have a happy ending yet, that don't have a, well, I was all messed up and then Jesus found me and now I'm great narrative. Because our lives don't work like that, right? Sometimes they do, and then they'll go squiffy and it all goes round in circles again. We have to be able to hold space for the real stories. And also, this is part of our healing from trauma. I'm going to pause one moment and talk a little bit about trauma because I haven't explained any terms or anything, and that will help us understand. So when we talk about trauma, we're not talking about suffering. I know that, like, kids tend to say, oh, I'm traumatized when I had a maths test. So when we talk about, we're not talking about suffering. Everybody has suffering. This is a normal part of life. It's part of how we learn to grow, part of how we, develop our skills, how we learn to be mature people is how we deal with suffering. But sometimes suffering happens at such a degree or a speed that it overwhelms our physical ability to cope with it. And if we can't process that quickly, then our body stores that overwhelm as trauma. And if we don't get to process it, then that can mean that things that don't necessarily make sense to someone who's not sharing that trauma can trigger a physical reaction. It's not something a person decides to do. It's how your nervous system and your fight and flight reactions and your brain, the way your brain works, this literally changes the coding in your body if you have unstored trauma going on. And so something can happen that's nothing to do with, doesn't appear to be a threat at all, but your body and your mind may react as though it's the threat of the original thing overwhelming you again. And the way that we heal from that, well, people differ about the use of the word healing in this, because healing suggests you can get back to a state of perfection that you were before the bad thing happened, and that's not necessarily true. I think we can remake ourselves after trauma. We can grow. We can become healthy again. We can integrate it into our memories so that we can remember the thing that happened as a thing in the past and not relive it as though it's still happening now. But the things that are important for that are, the first thing is you have to feel those feelings. You have to have a space where you are safe enough to be able to experience that fear, that rage. Different sorts of therapy can help with that, but some people find just worship helps with that, if that's still a safe space for you. But being able to feel those feelings, to let them come in a wave over you, and to just be able to hold that in a safe space and know that you're not immediately at threat. And that's why you will get some people who've been really traumatized in church, that church will not be the safe space that they can do that. Because every time they walk into a church or they hear worship music, they go straight back into panic mode. So for some people, the place that they need to just regulate won't be church. And that's important to understand, because sometimes we get really offended if somebody's like, but I can't come to your church because every time the guitar starts, I get a panic attack. It's important to be realistic about that and say, okay, that's fine. Maybe we can have a coffee. It doesn't have to be in a worship service. People need that space where they can regulate. They need that space where they can return their nervous system to a tolerable level before they can do anything else. And then the next thing is being able to tell your story and have it heard and have it witnessed, and be able to retell that story again and again until you can integrate it into your memories so it becomes part of your past and not part of your present. And the third thing is then reconnecting with community, whatever that looks like for you. But that's the third thing. And church leaders are sometimes, come and be part of our community. And we missed out step 1 and step 2, and we wonder why people have a meltdown. So it's good to just have a little bit of a background understanding there. So making space for stories and listen, always important, particularly with people who are remaking after trauma, but only if they've had the time to regulate. Otherwise, it could go wrong. We have to be okay, I think, with not being able to meet all needs at the same time. This is why lots of churches are great, because you know how it works in your town. There's probably the one church in your town that has the big youth work, And that's fine, right? If all the kids go there, they get well discipled, they get well looked after, that could be absolutely fine. Everywhere doesn't have to do everything. And maybe your church will be the one where the autistic people can have a lovely, straightforward, predictable service. Or maybe your church is the one with the flashing lights and the smoke machines that the AHD kids are like, yes! And that's fine, but you probably can't do all of it. Oh, disruption. This is one of the most fun things I found in my research is the church that has the healthiest culture out of the ones I'm looking at is one where every time they tried to do something, they got a roadblock in the way. Like something went wrong. A group of people who arrived and said, we can't do it like that. And they were like, but we really want to do it like that. And they were like, no, you can't. And they had to change the way they did prayer ministry and had to change the way they did worship, and they changed the words of some of the songs. And I think their building got flooded at one point. But all the bad things that happened forced them into a place of reflection, forced them into a place of growth, forced them into a position of, are you going to listen to these people and their stories or not? And they listened and they responded, and as a result, their culture's healthier. So it's really annoying, but if we can listen into the disruptions and lean into it, it can really help us. Have a feedback loop and get good at apologizing and learning. It's not fun, is it? But if we can have a quick feedback loop where people know if something's wrong, who they talk to, how to get it fixed, that can really help. And the way we present God, watch your worship songs, folks. In my study, I think I'm just looking at worship songs, not what people say, this is just songs, and the things that God does in songs. And in my study, between 2/3 and 3/4, imagine that on a pie chart, so that's like nearly 3/4 of your pie of things God does, is God dominating, reigning, being violent, breaking things, this very authoritarian view of God. Now, one of my churches, I think, does believe that's what God's like. The others don't. They're just singing the top 10 songs. But because they haven't filtered the top 10 songs, they haven't thought, oh yeah, that one's about God being almighty. Oh, this one's about God being almighty too. Oh, and that one's about God being almighty. You end up with a whole set list of God being almighty, and they kind of forgot to mention God's love. So I'm not saying ban all the fighty songs. Sometimes you want a good fighty song if you're feeling a bit on the back foot. You know, that's not a bad thing. But important to balance with, yes, and also God is loving, and also God is faithful, and also God listens to us, and also God sees you where you are. We need a balanced view, and a view that looks a little bit like Jesus, because one thing you can say about Jesus, I think he was not fighty. Am I right? Literally, like Carlton was saying this morning, they come to arrest Jesus in the garden. Peter gets out his sword to chop the guy's ear off, and Jesus heals the guy. The last thing Jesus is fighty. So if we're looking for songs that represent God accurately, if Jesus really is the image of the invisible God, fighty ones probably go to the bottom of the list. And this changes how people see us. You know, if people think God is authoritarian, domineering, violent, hierarchical in that kind of way, people are going to look at your church and I would imagine probably your leaders are going to tend towards being dominating and authoritarian and hierarchical because they're speaking the word of God, and that's what God's like. So we have to watch how we portray things and how we present people. Do we present people as always broken, always sinful, always fearful, always oppressed? Or do we present people as people who might be filled with the Holy Spirit, might have the mind of Christ, might be made in the image of God, might be able to discern truth, might have a gift of wisdom. They may have a voice and a story that brings something of real value to the church. Again, watch your song words. They can trip you up on this one. And then, so those are some things for leaders that are occurring to me. And then for others, I think there's a thing about, and also for those as leaders who carry trauma, I think there is a thing about, this is connected to the thing I was just saying about when we portray people as being fundamentally untrustworthy, broken, and all the rest of it, is that there's this disconnection from our body and our emotions. That you're told that, you know, if you're a good Christian, you will always be joyful. If you're a good Christian, then you are healed. If you're a good Christian, then we have to put this face on. I'm victorious in the Lord and everything is fine. And we all believe this, and we don't necessarily learn to listen well to our bodies and our emotions. Now, if God made your body God made your brain is part of your body, and God made you with the ability to feel, the ability to react. And some of us who've been in evangelical spaces a long time need to learn to tune back in to those body responses and those brain responses, your conscience, your sense of what's safe, your sense of what's right. Because we're not always encouraged in that. And it's a gift God's given you that's really vital. And especially for those of us who've maybe lived through some sort of trauma, the ability to listen to our body, to know ourselves, to know our minds, to know our reactions. If that thing is giving you, a panic reaction, notice that. Doesn't mean you're bad, but it's good to notice it because that enables us to set tolerable boundaries. It won't always be safe, and if we're growing, it won't always be comfortable, but it helps us to work out what we can deal with right now and what we can't. For example, there are days I'm perfectly happy walking into a minister's meeting where I know there's going to be a load of people who don't believe I should exist. And there'll be days where I'm not. And I'm okay with that. If it's a good day, I'll go, I'll chat to people, I'll have coffee, I'll have a good time. And then if I'm not feeling okay with it that day, if I'm feeling just a little bit vulnerable or a bit shaky or I've had a rough week, I'll send my apologies. And I'm okay with that. And I think that's good to just know your limits, know they vary. If you have trauma, make friends with it. Know what your triggers are. Know what in your body feels like, okay, right, meltdown coming on, need to get out of this one. Pay attention to that wisdom. Because you can remake, but if it hasn't happened yet, just learn, make friends with yourself and know how to interpret that. And there's a thing about recognizing that trauma reactions, if you know that feeling of just going into absolute panic or fight or flight or whatever it feels like for you, that tells important truth. It tells truth about your feelings, that's real, it's not made up. It tells truth about, whatever the trigger was. It's really worth paying attention to that once you're regulated, because that will tell you something important about maybe where you need to go to get more remaking. But it doesn't always tell you the truth about the situation. So if I go up to somebody and touch them on the shoulder and they have a massive at me, perhaps because, that maybe they've been physically assaulted or something before and they don't like being touched without a warning. And that was my mistake. I got it wrong. I made a genuine mistake. And now their pain is real. Their pain and their panic is totally, they're out of control. They need to go and regulate. They need to go and sit down. They need to get themselves back under their control. But two things are true at the same time there. My intention wasn't to cause hurt. I didn't do anything illegal or wrong. I made a mistake, and now I know that I won't do that to them again. But I might have, once they've regulated, I might have a conversation and say, look, I know that really upset you, didn't it? Do you want me to tell everybody, do you want me to share that with the church so we all know, or do you want to keep that as your private business, just to see if you can support people while they're still processing that? But if that person then goes, oh my goodness, major safeguarding breach, I was assaulted without my consent, that would be a bit of an overreaction. But it's not for them because the feeling is real. And maybe it helps at that point to perhaps check out with somebody else and say, this happened, it really freaked me out, but you know my history, do you think that's like something that's worth saying something about, or is that just me having a trauma reaction? Because somebody else might say, well, yeah, I can see you were really upset, but honestly, she only put a hand on your shoulder, it wasn't really a thing. And it helps us to manage things in a bit of context. And then work towards remaking. Find spaces where you can tell your story and be heard and witnessed. That could be online, that could be real people. That could be in worship telling God. It could be in prayer in your bedroom telling God, if a whole room worship space is a lot. And noticing that disruption and discomfort are often our point of growth. And we have to learn wisdom on that, because there's a lot of space of, this is a little bit uncomfortable, to actually I can't cope. And somewhere in between is the growth point. So I think those are my initial thoughts. We have another half an hour. What I'd like to do is maybe give opportunity, perhaps in small groups. If you talk about times where you've been living in, what is it that causes the tension? Have you found anything that really helps with that? Is there anything that you would maybe feel prepared to share with your group and say, look, this is a situation I'm in, none of those things seem to work. Could you suggest something? And share with each other perhaps some ways that we can manage being in those tense situations, whether it's in your church or in your denomination or a thing of conflicting need. Because I think this is, when Jesus prayed that we would be one as Jesus and the Father are one. It didn't mean we were going to all be the same. It didn't mean we all had to pretend and fake this idea of unity. It meant something about this learning to understand each other, this learning to hear each other, this learning to take responsibility for ourselves and our relationships in a way that we can learn and work together even with the people who are really different. Does that make some sense? Okay, so if I give about, 10 minutes perhaps, we'll go to 2:41, big clock up there. If you're please don't feel like you have to share anything if you don't want to. Obviously, be your own judge of what you think is appropriate. But if you could turn in groups of maybe 4, 5, 6 and talk about situations where you've encountered this tension and what has worked for you, and see if we have any wisdom to share, that would be great. Is that all right? Cool, thank you.